The April morning in 2025 began with an unusual stir on Maple Grove Street in Grand Rapids, Michigan. 6 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a pale blue two-story house at the end of the tree-lined road. Neighbors peered through their curtains as officers in tactical gear from the Michigan SWAT Team moved into position, silently surrounding the property. Inside, 57-year-old Caleb Quinn was brewing coffee, a habit he had maintained for years as a quiet, reclusive widower who always woke up before the neighborhood stirred. The decisive knock on the door came at 7:32 a.m., followed by a clear, amplified voice, "Caleb Quinn, Michigan State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Hazel and June Quinn." Officers later recounted that Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he set the coffee cup down, but his gaze remained strangely calm, as if he had known that this day, sooner or later, would arrive. Before we delve deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you are watching from, and if you love journeys to uncover forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The summer of 2010 saw the quiet suburban neighborhood in Grand Rapids, Michigan, steeped in heat and the scent of freshly cut grass. On the small tree-lined street, shaded by red maples, 2-story wooden houses stood close together, their windows slightly ajar, to welcome the evening breeze. The Quinn family lived at the end of the road, the pale blue house with a wooden porch and an old swing set that creaked whenever the wind blew. Neighbors were familiar with the sight of the father and his 2 daughters, 45-year-old Caleb Quinn, an overnight shift mechanic, and his 2 young girls, Hazel, 12, quiet and loved to draw; June, 9, mischievous, and always riding her pink bicycle around the block. That night, no one noticed anything unusual. Caleb's gray Dodge Charger was still parked in the driveway, and light shone through the curtains of the house. Around 10 o'clock, Mrs. Gretchen Wells, the next-door neighbor, even heard the sound of children's laughter echoing through the window. When she turned off her lights to go to sleep, the light from the Quinns upstairs was still on. It was rare for the 2 girls to stay up so late, but she just assumed they were watching a movie or playing with puzzles, as usual. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight hit the wooden steps, and the neighborhood slowly woke up. But house number 1118 was unusually silent. No sound of the door opening, no radio, no children's laughter. Caleb said he woke up later than usual, thinking his 2 daughters were still asleep. As he walked up the stairs, he called out, "Hazel, June, time to wake up." There was no reply. The bedroom door was slightly open. The 2 beds were empty, the sheets and blankets rumpled, pillows fallen to the floor. The window was ajar, the curtain gently swaying in the wind. On the desk, Hazel's sketchbook lay open to a half-finished page, her pencil rolled onto the wooden floor. In the corner of the room, June's teddy bear lay face down. There were no signs of a struggle, no disturbed belonging. Caleb walked downstairs, moving slowly through the living room, looking around the kitchen, then opening the back door. The backyard was quiet, the gate unopened, the car still in the same spot as last night. Everything seemed frozen in the moment of the previous night. He went out to the porch, calling out his daughters' names, his voice hoarse, but only the sound of the wind through the maple trees answered. He ran over to Mrs. Wells' house to ask if she had seen the 2 girls, but she just shook her head. No one in the neighborhood had heard or seen anything out of the ordinary. Caleb returned, standing in the hallway, his eyes scanning the silent house. On the dining table, 2 glasses of milk were untouched, the foam dissolved, the bread stale. The ticking of the wall clock was suffocatingly regular. He tried to find a logical explanation. Perhaps the 2 woke up early, went to a friend's house, or went out for a bike ride. But when he looked at the front door again, the lock was still set, the key resting on the shelf. There was no way that you'd have left without opening the door. A chill ran down his spine. He quickly walked into the living room, reaching for the phone. With trembling hands, he dialed the emergency number. His voice was broken, choked. I can't find my 2 daughters. I think they're missing." At the police station, the officer on duty clearly heard the panic and the breath on the other end of the line. He took down the address, then transferred the information through the emergency system. Just a few minutes later, the first patrol car appeared at the end of Maple Grove Street. Flashing red and blue lights swept across the rows of trees, then stopped in front of the pale blue house. Two officers stepped out of the car, one carrying a notebook, the other a camera. Caleb stood waiting on the porch, his face strained, his eyes dark and empty. When asked, he recounted everything exactly as it had just happened. He woke up this morning, went upstairs to call his daughters, and found the room empty. The police entered, beginning to note every detail. The front door was locked from the inside, the frame was not pried, and the lock was unscratched. The upstairs window was ajar, the curtains gently swaying in the wind. Inside the house, there were no signs of disturbance. The living room was tidy, belongings in their original places, dishes in the sink all clean. Only the children's room drew attention. The two beds were displaced, pillows fallen to the floor, the sketchbook open, the pencil broken in half. Everything stopped as if someone had just left abruptly. Technical officers began photographing the scene, carefully measuring and noting details. One traced the hallway to the back door, where a small gravel path led to the road. The gate was securely locked. The fence showed no signs of being pried open. Outside, the dry grass and hard dirt bore no footprints. A young officer looked around, shaking his head. Nothing. Caleb was invited to sit at the dining table to give a statement. He spoke slowly, his voice steady but tired. Last night he was home. The two girls watched TV late, then went to bed. When asked when the light in their room went out, he said he didn't remember clearly, only that everything was normal. The police asked about the household routine. He replied, "I always lock the door before going to bed. The girls don't have a key." The answer prompted the commanding officer to write an additional note. Locked from inside, need to check internal possibility. The K-9 unit arrived shortly after. Two police dogs were allowed to smell the girls' blankets, then led to the backyard. The scent trail led to the north fence, and then vanished. There was no indication that they had left the house this way, nor was there any scent of a stranger around the yard. The area was cordoned off, and the police expanded the search to a small park a few blocks away, the grassy bank of the Grand River, and the strip of land near the old railway. Patrol teams searched every alley, calling the girls' names, asking every resident. Neighbors only mentioned that the light in the Quinn house stayed on very late, and they heard nothing else. No shouting, no sound of a car driving away. A few women stood leaning against their gates, whispering that the two girls were good, never went far alone. Back at the house, forensic police continued to sweep for fingerprints around the windows and door handles. The preliminary results indicated only 3 sets of prints: Caleb's, Hazel's, and June's. No prints from strangers. In the kitchen, the 2 glasses of milk were untouched. The bread hardened on the plate. Nothing in the living room was disturbed. The entire house was unusually clean, as if it had just been tidied up the night before. An officer looked up, scanning the room, and quietly said, "If the 2 left on their own, they should have left some kind of sign." The statement made the atmosphere even thicker. Caleb sat slumped at the table, his hands tightly clasped, his eyes blank. When asked if his daughters had ever run away from home, he quietly replied, "Never, they only stayed around here." As the afternoon wore on, light streaming through the dusty curtains cast patchy shadows on the walls. The preliminary report was completed. No signs of forced entry, no suspicious evidence. 2 minors missing under unusual circumstances. The officer in charge closed his notebook, instructing Caleb to maintain the integrity of the house so the investigation team could continue their work the next day. Before leaving, the commanding officer paused at the door, his gaze sweeping over the small room again. Everything was intact, suspiciously orderly, a house without signs of violence, yet lacking 2 lives. And in that thick silence, the disappearance of Hazel and June Quinn officially became a mystery that woke up all of Grand Rapids. When the investigation team left the scene, house number 118 remained sealed off, the yellow tape fluttering in the wind. Everything seemed clear, a disappearance without a trace, without evidence. But in the temporary office of the Grand Rapids Police Department, Lieutenant Mark Hanley still sat before the thick file, flipping through each page of notes. Something unsettled him. The father's statement was strangely smooth, as if it had been prearranged in his mind. Hanley began to review every detail. Caleb said he was home all evening, went to bed at midnight, and never left the house. But when they contacted the auto shop where he worked, The management confirmed he had requested 2 consecutive days off, and no one had seen him there. On the timesheet, Caleb's name was marked as absent without leave. The manager added that he hadn't submitted a formal request for time off, only a text message reporting he was sick. This information prompted Hanley to slowly draw a red line under the phrase "at home all evening" in the statement. He opened the technical team's report. The electricity consumption dropped suddenly on the night the 2 girls disappeared. Ground floor devices were turned off earlier than usual. That small change hinted at unease. No one turns off all the lights when 2 children are still awake. Another detail: Hazel's desk had a fresh wipe mark, while the surrounding area was covered in thick dust, as if someone had only cleaned one small spot. These small points, when put together, created a confusing picture. Hanley decided to re-interview the neighbors. The first person he met was Mrs. Gretchen Wells, who lived right next door to the Quinns. She remembered clearly, "That night, I heard an argument. A man's voice, loud and angry. Then something heavy dropped to the floor. After that it was silent." Another person at the end of the street confirmed hearing a similar sound, like a door slamming shut, followed by a long silence. They didn't call the police, assuming it was just a father arguing with his daughter. When questioned again, Caleb calmly denied it. He said, "I just yelled at the 2 of them for staying up late watching a movie. Nothing serious." His voice was steady, neither trembling nor distraught. The way he sat, the way he answered, was all proper, even overly. For Hanley, that calmness was not a good sign. A normal father, after his children go missing, would be expected to be confused, scared, and constantly questioning the police. But Caleb, he just sat there, looking down at the floor, his voice dry as if reciting someone else's story. In the internal memo, Hanley wrote, "Cooperative attitude, but lacking emotion, not displaying anxiety commensurate with the situation." When asked what he thought might have happened, Caleb merely said, "I don't know, maybe someone took them." No attempt to explain, no suggestion of other avenues to search. Throughout the search, he barely left the house. When the police expanded the search to the park and the empty lot, Caleb just sat at the dining table, looking out the window. A young officer returned and told Hanley. He didn't ask what they found, didn't say anything, just sat and watched. The feeling made the whole team uneasy, as if this man was waiting to see how much they would discover, not genuinely hoping his children would be found. Hanley began cross-referencing the factors. No signs of forced entry, the house locked from the inside. Fingerprints only from the 3 family members, Caleb's car spotless. No external clues, but everything inside was too neat. He noted in the report, high probability that the incident occurred within the family. Although evidence was still lacking, the feeling of suspicion began to solidify within the entire team. The behavioral science unit also provided a preliminary assessment. The father's demeanor was inconsistent with a crisis stage. He showed no signs of anger, fear, or despair. Instead, he was calm, detached, and avoided referring to his daughters by name. When asked again if anyone held a grudge against the family, Caleb shook his head, his voice cold. "We are not close to anyone here." In the internal meeting that evening, Hanley summarized everything: discrepancies in the alibi about his work schedule. Witnesses heard arguing on the night of the disappearance. No signs of external break-in. The father's behavior and emotions were abnormal. On the investigation board, the words "missing juveniles" were crossed out and replaced with a new phrase: possible domestic homicide, pending evidence. The case was officially upgraded, and Caleb became the person under the closest surveillance. When the police returned to the house to collect more samples, Caleb was still present. He opened the door, let them in, and didn't ask a single question. The dim light cast a shadow on his emotionless face, showing no signs of someone living in panic. Hanley paused at the threshold, looking around the house again. Everything was exactly as it was the first day they arrived: neat, clean, absolutely silent. Only one thing had changed. A chilling sensation lingered in the air, as if the house were holding on to something they all had missed. And from that moment, the direction of the Grand Rapids police investigation changed. They were no longer searching for 2 children wandering outside, but began to uncover what truly happened to them, right inside this house. After the case officially pivoted towards an internal family investigation, The house at 118 was sealed off for a comprehensive crime scene examination. In the morning, the forensic technical team from the Grand Rapids Police Department arrived with specialized vehicles, carrying chemical scanning equipment and biological sample collection tools. The entire area was cordoned off a second time. Neighbors were asked to temporarily vacate the neighborhood to prevent contamination of the scene. Under the pale sunlight, the yellow tape fluttered softly in the wind, while inside the house, the air was thick with the smell of chemicals and metal. The lead forensic investigator, Detective Roy Denton, opened the scene file and instructed his team, "We are reviewing everything from the beginning. No assumptions, no exclusions." He switched on a UV lamp and signaled to turn off all the lights in the house. Luminol was sprayed onto every patch of the wooden floor, every stair tread. Initially only a faint light gradually spread, then under the violet wavelength, hazy blue-green glowing areas appeared, in an arc shape, extending from the staircase down to the kitchen door. Denton paused and called a technician to document the finding. "We have traces of organic matter, highly likely wiped-down residue." The team moved slowly, following the patchy glow, until it faded under the kitchen floor. A small sample was collected, sealed, and assigned an item number. When they moved to the living room, the light again reflected a circular streak near the leg of a table. It wasn't dark enough to be blood, but it reacted clearly to luminol, a sign that the area had been cleaned with an oxidizing solution. Concurrently, 2 other technicians checked the garage area. Caleb's 209 Dodge Charger remained parked, doors locked, the paint so shiny it reflected the ceiling lights. They opened the door and noted a faint chemical odor, not gasoline, but something similar to an industrial cleaning solution. On the dashboard were a few dried droplets, speckled as if sprayed during interior cleaning. Denton stepped over and signaled to open the trunk. Inside, the carpet liner was brand new, but the retaining clips were older models, an indication that the carpet had been replaced. He nodded to his subordinate, "Seal the entire vehicle. Take it to the Lansing laboratory." The Charger was towed away on a flatbed, completely covered. As the indoor team continued to scan the staircase area, they noticed a faint glowing streak along the handrail. Its shape was indistinct, not dark enough to be formatted as blood, but it ran along a short curve, like the slide mark of a hand coated in solution. Samples were taken according to procedure, cotton swabs moistened with distilled water, sealed, and signed by 3 witnesses. Inside the children's room, everything remained as it was during the previous inspection. However, under UV light, a coin-sized circular spot appeared on the wall near Hazel's bed. When illuminated closely, the fluorescent color faded and then disappeared completely. A weak sign, possibly from saliva, tears, or a superficial wiping effort. Nevertheless, Denton had the sample collected. "Every detail can become a key," he stated. By the time the technical team completed the first sweep, they established a preliminary report. Discovery of chemical wipe-down traces scattered from the staircase down to the kitchen. Reactive substance compatible with hydrogen peroxide or an oxygen-based cleaning solution. In the report sent back to Hanley, Denton added, "No fresh bloodstains, but the optical samples suggest that biological material was previously cleaned up." At the Lansing laboratory, the Charger was dismantled piece by piece. Technicians examined every floor crevice, seat base, and the new carpet liner. Under UV inspection, a few tiny glowing dots appeared amidst the synthetic fibers. They cut samples and sent them for DNA tests. Simultaneously, the bottle of liquid in the trunk was seized. The label was faint, but the writing could still be read. "Stain and odor remover, hydrogen peroxide formula." In the interim forensic report, the chemistry specialist noted, "Detection of hydrogen peroxide residue, an enzymatic cleaning agent, commonly used to eliminate organic stains." This perfectly matched the findings inside the house. Upon receiving the initial results, Hanley felt his suspicion was being strengthened, but he knew it was not enough yet. The recovered DNA was too scarce and incomplete. Samples from the car only yielded a weak reaction, insufficient for identification. The samples from the house were contradictory. Some matched the family pet, others were unidentifiable. The specialists had to send them for cross-examination at the state laboratory. The forensic work dragged on, and the investigation was temporarily stalled at the verification stage. During this time, Caleb remained free, neither arrested nor charged. He was silent, did not participate in the search, nor did he speak to the media. When Whenever reporters knocked, he simply drew the curtains close. Internally, Hanley wrote in his weekend report, "Forensic results are inconclusive, but circumstantial evidence suggests signs of cleanup at the scene. Biological samples must be further examined, and the vehicle's travel itinerary verified." In the evening when everyone left the headquarters, Hanley remained alone, looking at the map of the Allegan area hung on the wall. A thin red line connected Grand Rapids to the western forest region, an area Caleb once mentioned in an earlier interview as where he occasionally took the children camping. He lightly circled it. There was no clear evidence, no DNA results, but Hanley's intuition told him that this case would not end with a simple runaway. And somewhere out there was something that the cleaning solution could not erase, the trace of the truth. In the days following the search, everything seemed to slow down. The Grand Rapids Investigative Office was engulfed in the weary atmosphere of waiting. The biological samples, sent for examination, still had no results, and supplementary reports offered nothing new. Meanwhile, the pale blue house at the end of Maple Grove Street remained silent, the yellow tape stretched across the gate, gradually fading in the sun. Residents in the area began to return to their normal lives, only occasionally mentioning the disappearance as a half-believed, half-doubted story. Hanley persistently reviewed the file. He looked at every page of crime scene photos, reread Caleb's testimony, and then stared at the notes board on the wall. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no distinct physical evidence. The repetitive phrases were a cold reminder that all their efforts had stalled at the starting point. The forensic technical team returned from Lansing with the interim examination report. The DNA results from the samples in the house were not complete enough for identification. The samples collected from the Dodge Charger only showed a weak signal, making it impossible to conclude the presence of human blood. All evidence was at the threshold of not enough to exclude, but not enough to charge. The cold numbers on the result sheet made Hanley angrily throw his pen onto the desk. He knew that with just one small error, the case would have to be closed. They tried a different approach, checking security cameras around the neighborhood. But this was 2010, a time when most families had not yet installed personal surveillance systems. The nearest convenience store was 2 blocks away. Their camera only faced the parking lot. Maple Grove Street had no traffic lights, nor any public camera. The entire area seemed to be enveloped in a surveillance void, stopping all leads at the very first boundary. Police also failed to find any credible witnesses. People living nearby only remembered the Quinn house lights being on late, then turning off completely, followed by silence. A few claimed to have heard an argument, but no one saw the 2 children leave the house. No one saw any unusual movement in the area. Even Caleb's car, according to his testimony, did not leave the garage that night, and no one could prove otherwise. The behavioral science unit was invited to assist, but after interviewing Caleb again, they also could not reach a definitive conclusion. A psychological expert commented, "He is cold but not panicked. It could be a defense mechanism or it could be concealment." That answer was not very helpful. 3 weeks passed, and the case remained stagnant. The investigation room gradually shifted personnel to other cases. Hanley kept a small team to continue monitoring Caleb, but all they recorded was a man living quietly, going to the market, going to work, returning home, not contacting anyone, and not leaving the city. He did not leave Grand Rapids even once, showing no signs of fleeing. Every move was abnormal in its normality. The media, which had been relentless in the early days, also began to withdraw. Local newspapers shifted to news stories, and TV news only mentioned the incident in a few brief lines. Sisters Hazel and June Quinn have still not been found. Police urged the public to provide additional information. After that, the case drifted into silence. One evening, Hanley drove through the Maple Grove neighborhood, stopping in front of house number 1. The light inside was still faintly on, the curtain tightly drawn. He saw the shadow of the man standing silently in the kitchen. It was unclear what he was doing, only that the silhouette remained motionless for a very long time. There was something in that sight that made him shudder. That stillness was not of an innocent person, but of someone who had become accustomed to living amidst guilt. But without evidence, there was nothing he could do but drive away, leaving behind a house as quiet as if no incident had ever occurred. A week later, the police department officially announced the temporary suspension of active investigation. The file for the disappearance of Hazel and June Quinn was classified as pending evidence review, awaiting forensic results, or new leads. In reality, Everyone understood this was a gentle way of saying that a case had been stalled. Caleb did not leave the area. He switched to the day shift at the factory, was quiet, and did not socialize with neighbors. When reporters sought him out, he refused to answer. "I don't want to talk about it anymore," was the only sentence he uttered before closing the door. A few neighbors still looked at him with suspicion, but then stopped, as no one wanted to prolong the haunting. The disappearance of the two children gradually became a quiet story. The posters plastered around the neighborhood had their letters blurred by wind and rain. Every time Hanley passed them, he still wondered, if they were truly alive, why hadn't anyone seen them anywhere? And if they were dead, why was no trace left behind? On his desk, the file labeled the Quinn sisters' missing case still sat neatly in a plastic cover, clipped with a few half-written notes. On the last page, he wrote a short sentence in red pen: "No evidence does not mean no crime." But eventually, the file was sent to the archive. The lights in the room slowly dimmed, and the Hazel, June Quinn case officially entered a state of dormancy, like the small house where everything began. Quietly, vaguely, and with no one knowing that 15 years later, everything would be turned over from the start. 15 years passed. The Quinn sisters' file rested quietly in the Grand Rapids Police Department archives, gathering dust as thick as the memories of those once involved. No one mentioned Hazel and June anymore, apart from an occasional thread on forums about unsolved missing person cases in Michigan. Caleb still lived silently in the old house, going to work, coming home, and never leaving Grand Rapids. Everything seemed to be frozen, until one day, a random fire reignited the case thought to be long forgotten. In the middle of the Allegan State Game Area, more than 60 kilometers west of Grand Rapids, the state government conducted a controlled burn to clear underbrush and reduce the risk of wildfires in the summer. Thin smoke floated over the damp patches of land. The smell of burning wood mingled with the spring wind. When the fire was extinguished, the ground was left with only black ash and bare tree stumps, exposing things that were previously covered. A park ranger named Eddie Moore was inspecting the southern area, near an old trail leading into the heart of the forest, when he saw a light-colored object amidst the ashes. At first, he thought it was a piece of ceramic or an animal bone, but when he bent down, the shape made him stop. In the scorched layer of earth was a small pale white piece of bone, too slender to belong to a large animal. A few dozen meters away, he found another similar part, half submerged in the sand and soil. A hunch told him he had stumbled upon something unusual. Moore immediately marked the location, called his superior, and the area was cordoned off within an hour. By the afternoon, the Michigan State Police Evidence Response Team, MS, specialized vehicles were lined up, their yellow lights flashing against the backdrop of the scorched forest. The lead forensic sergeant, Riley Cooper, quickly delineated the crime scene. He laid out tarps, erected tents, and established a temporary coordination center. Every movement was filmed and recorded in its entirety. As the technicians began to lightly scrape the burnt soil, other bone fragments gradually appeared. A forearm bone, a rib bone, and then a part of a small skull, seemingly belonging to a child. The distance between the two discovery points was over 30 meters, and both were located near a trail leading to a dry creek. There were no intact clothes, only a few dark fabric scraps, possibly once children's clothing, that had decomposed. A single light pink plastic button was picked up with tweezers and carefully placed in a plastic bag. Cooper knelt down, looking around the plot of land. 2 sets of remains, 2 locations, same state of decomposition, likely buried around the same time. He signaled to the team to photograph the overall scene, mark the GPS coordinates, and then proceed to collect samples. Each bone fragment was wrapped in special paper, placed in a separate box, clearly labeled with the location code and orientation. The soil inspection team collected additional samples of sediment and burnt grass nearby for microbiological component analysis. A technician discovered a small metal object in the underlying soil, cylindrical, rusted, appearing to be a key fob. After a preliminary rinse, the inscription on the surface became clear: H&J. The team fell silent. Those 2 characters didn't explicitly reveal anything, but a cold feeling ran down their spines. Cooper only nodded, his voice low. Collect as evidence. No speculation at this time. Everything was carried out with absolute caution. As the sun set, the forest became eerily quiet. The lights of the investigation team swept across the ground speckled with ash, reflecting onto the silver tar. In the darkness, the small evidence bags were neatly arranged in rows, each individually numbered. The initial preliminary report recorded discovery of 2 sets of human remains corresponding in size to children, state of full decomposition, time of death estimated to be over 10 years. No signs of direct violence detected on the bones due to the level of decay. News of the discovery quickly spread. Police units across the region were notified to review old missing children's files. Within hours, the Michigan State database displayed over 20 unsolved identification cases. But when comparing the geographical location, the distance from Grand Rapids to Allegan, and the victims' ages, one name was immediately circled. Hazel and June Quinn, the 2 sisters who disappeared without a trace, and the bone samples were transferred to the Michigan State Medical Examiner's Office, under the direction of Dr. Mara Leland, the chief examiner. She had nearly 20 years of experience with cold cases. Upon opening the box containing the evidence, she knew with a quick glance that this was not a simple case. The remains are dry, clean, with no signs of cutting. Microscopic analysis is needed to determine the precise age and gender. The work lasted for many hours. Each bone fragment was measured, photographed, and compared with anthropological data. Preliminary results showed that both sets of remains belonged to children between the ages of 8, corresponding to Hazel and June at the time of their disappearance. Leland ordered bone marrow samples to be sent to the MSP Forensic Lab's DNA unit for cross-referencing with the National Missing Persons Database. While awaiting the results, state police coordinated with the Grand Rapids Department to review the old files. Hanley, now retired, was recontacted. Upon hearing the news, he was silent for a long time. I always knew they were somewhere, I just didn't think it was this close. He returned to the headquarters, and saw his old file being taken out of storage. On the cover, the faded handwriting was still visible. The Quinn sisters, missing case. 3 days later, the DNA test results were returned. The skeletal samples completely matched the biological profiles of Hazel and June Quinn, which were collected in. The accompanying report confirmed the time of death was around the summer of the same year. The 2 girls disappeared. The specific cause could not be determined due to the extensive decomposition, but there were no signs of cremation or natural accident. In the Grand Rapids Police Department press room, the spokesperson read the statement in a solemn tone. After 15 years, the disappearance of sisters Hazel and June Quinn has seen a significant breakthrough. Michigan State Police confirmed that the remains of the 2 victims have been found in the Allegan State Game area. We are coordinating with relevant units to reopen the investigation, to determine the cause of death and the legal responsibility of those involved. Outside the building, the April wind blew through, carrying the damp smell of the burnt forest, and with it a case that seemed to have been dormant for 15 years, suddenly woke up, bringing with it the old questions about a father, a house, and 2 children, who once disappeared in the night without anyone hearing a cry. The Michigan State Medical Examiner's Office was steeped in cold, white light, where the scent of antiseptic and the earthy smell of ash from the scene still lingered in the air. On the steel table, 2 evidence boxes were slowly opened, each containing cleaned and numbered bone fragments. Mara Leland, the Kent County Medical Examiner, stood by the table in rubber gloves, her focus absolute. She had handled hundreds of death cases, but something about these 2 sets of remains made her especially quiet. They were smaller than she had imagined, and found too close to Grand Rapids to be considered a coincidence. The work began with sorting each bone fragment: skull, femur, ribs, and wrist bones. All were meticulously recorded in the official report. When the technician turned on the microscopic light, the bone surfaces showed signs of deep weathering, the natural decay of more than a decade. Despite this, a few parts of the central bone marrow remained structurally intact, enough for DNA extraction. The samples were sent to the MSP Forensic Lab's DNA analysis unit, where technicians used the modern STR method to cross-reference them with the missing persons database. The results came back after only a few days. The DNA perfectly matched the biological profiles of sisters Hazel and June Quinn, which were collected in 2010 when the disappearance case was first opened. This notification was quickly transferred to the State Investigation Office, marking a turning point that those who had pursued the case for 15 years had almost given up hope for. Dr. Leland looked at the line of text, printed on the report: genotype match, Probability. She paused, then gently removed her glasses and placed them on the table. We found those 2 children, she said, her voice slow and deep. But that confirmation came with a heavy burden. Finding the bodies did not equate to finding the truth. In the initial autopsy report sent to the Michigan State Police, Dr. Leland clearly noted 3 key conclusions. Signs of decomposition in the burial environments suggested the time of death coincided with the time the 2 girls were reported missing. The cause of death could not be determined due to the complete decomposition of soft tissue and the lack of characteristic bone trauma. When the investigation team finished reading the conclusions, the room fell silent. There were no skull injuries, no signs of slashing, no bullet marks, and no chemical evidence indicating poisoning. All that remained were bones, earth, and the vacuum of time. Hanley, who had investigated the original case and was now retired, was invited to review the results. He was silent when he saw the printed photo of the crime scene, 2 strips of burnt earth, 2 small skeletons lying parallel in the ash. 15 years, he muttered, and still not a single trace to tell us what really happened. The Michigan State Police officially reopened the file. All 2010 documents were pulled out, testimonies, scene reports, and incomplete forensic analysis. But upon review, they realized the case still lacked the decisive element, direct incriminating evidence. No one saw Caleb take the children out of the house. There was no camera footage, no witnesses, no blood traces, and no foreign DNA. Even the suspected Dodge Charger at this point had samples so degraded they were almost useless. Dr. Leland and the team of forensic specialists tried to extract more from the bones themselves. They used electron microscopy to look for hairline fractures or cut marks, but the results showed no damage consistent with mechanical violence. Chemical analysis detected no heavy metals or toxins in the bone marrow, meaning the 2 children were not poisoned. Finally, Leland had to write in the supplementary conclusion, no physical signs indicating the cause of death. Manner or means of death cannot be determined. News of the discovery quickly spread to the media. Newspapers reprinted the photo of the 2 sisters from the old 2010 picture. Clear smiles, innocent eyes. Headlines uniformly ran, "Bodies of missing sisters in Grand Rapids, found after 15 years. Police, still unable to determine cause of death." The public was moved, but that emotion quickly turned into frustration upon realizing the case still had no answer. The state police held a press conference, announcing they were collaborating with forensic units and would continue the investigation based on new evidence. But internally, they understood that what they had was too little to move forward. The examination proved the victims were Hazel and June, but a DNA match alone could not incriminate someone, especially when the old evidence was almost erased by time. In the summary report sent to the Michigan Department of Justice, the chief investigator wrote briefly, "Based on the forensic status and the state of decomposition, the cause of death cannot yet be determined. There is no direct evidence confirming criminal activity. The case remains classified as homicide, unconfirmed cause." Everyone involved in the case felt the disappointment keenly. For Hanley, it was like a circle closing where it began. A missing persons case without a solution. Only this time they had found the bodies. But the truth was still buried under the damp earth, just like the skeletons accidentally awakened by the forest fire. Dr. Leland stayed at the examination room late into the evening. She looked at the 2 small newly sealed boxes of remains. On the label was the case file number, no names, no ages, just cold characters. She picked up a pen and wrote a small line in the corner of the label, "Recovered from Allegan State Game Area, case pending justice." In Grand Rapids, Caleb's old house was still lit every night. He did not appear before the press, nor did he respond. When a reporter sought him out, he said only one sentence before closing the door, "If they truly found my children, I want them to rest in peace." That quote was replayed on the night news, plunging the city into silence. But for the state investigators, that statement did not close the case. It only raised an old question no one had answered. If he truly wanted them to rest in peace, why had he never searched for them? As night fell over Allegan, the wind blew through the recently burned forest, rustling through the remaining ashes. Beneath that ground, the story of the 2 little girls and the silent father was still unfinished. And although the police now had everything, identity, time, location, the one thing they still lacked was the truth. What was once seen as a breakthrough was now just a stale headline on old newspapers. No suspects, no concrete evidence, no cause of death, and no confession. A case closed without anyone daring to say it was truly over. In the months after the bodies were identified, Grand Rapids gradually returned to normal life. On Maple Grove Street, house number 118 still stood, its blue paint faded, its curtains drawn all day. Caleb Quinn did not leave the house. He lived quietly, rarely going out except for work. Neighbors recounted seeing the yellow light from the second floor every night, and hearing footsteps pacing until near morning. But when someone knocked, he never answered. On the other side, Renee Dalton, the children's mother, had left Michigan years before. She moved to Chicago, starting a new life away from the city associated with the old pain. When police announced finding her daughter's remains, she refused to appear on camera, sending only a brief statement through her lawyer. "I want to remember them as children who were still alive." No one knew where she lived after that. Some said she changed her name, others that she remarried. In the police file, she was simply noted, "No longer in Michigan." At the Grand Rapids Police Department headquarters, the thick, nearly 200-page file with code 2010-40, it was moved to the Kent County Archive, where hundreds of old cases were neatly stacked on metal shelves. Each case was a forgotten fragment of memory, each file label a name that had vanished from life. Hazel and June were now just two among them. 2 number sequences, 2 DNA samples, 2 faded school photos taped to the cover. Hanley, who had followed the first investigation, and was now fully retired, still occasionally remembered it. He kept a copy of the photo of the 2 sisters in his wallet, as a reminder of the cases that are never solved. Once, at a gathering of former officers, someone asked him, "If you could go back, what would you do differently?" Hanley simply replied, "I would have stayed at that house longer. Some things cannot be found if you leave too soon." In the evidence warehouse, Caleb's 2009 Dodge Charger was still kept, tarped, sealed, placed among rows of other seized vehicles. Occasionally, a warehouse employee would check the seal, recording in the log, "Vehicle intact. No new examination requests." Dust blurred the logo on the hood. Whenever light shone through the window, the silver paint reflected on the wall like a distant streak of light, recalling something both old and unfinished. Time passed, and Grand Rapids changed. The children who had attended school with Hazel and June were now adults. Some moved away, others remained. Sometimes they still mentioned the 2 sisters as a sad story in an old coffee shop. "Do you remember the Quinn girls' case?" Then silence, no one knowing what else to say. For the police force, the case was considered a failure. Though no one said it aloud, everyone understood that from the moment the cause of death could not be found, the file had been relegated to the dead zone of criminal investigation, where cases lie dormant for decades until new technology or accidental evidence is unearthed, and most of them would never be reopened. In the basement of the Kent County Evidence Storage Building, the row of metal shelves stretched endlessly. Among the hundreds of coded files, the Quinn sisters' file sat in the corner of Section A7, the second shelf from the bottom. A small white tag attached to the spine bore the cold words, "Status unresolved. Last update, 2025. On the attached log sheet, the last line was handwritten by the warehouse manager, "No further action required." That was it. No more special investigation teams, no more media, no more questions. Everything returned to silence. The case that once shook the entire city now only existed as a faint blur in local judicial history. Those involved retired, transferred, or completely forgot what they once believed was important. Occasionally, someone would still send an anonymous email to the state police hotline, claiming to have seen the 2 girls somewhere, but each time the verification quickly ended, not related to the Quinn case. It got to the point where the night shift staff joked that the name Quinn was a curse of false leads. That autumn, a new police department employee was assigned to inventory the evidence warehouse. When he flipped through the logbook, his eyes stopped at the Quinn sisters' file. He asked his superior, "Why isn't this case closed completely?" The other replied simply, "Because no one has proven it was a murder." Then he fell silent, as if the answer itself was not enough to be satisfactory. The house on Maple Grove was finally sold to a young family. They repainted the walls, replaced the carpet, and removed all the old furniture. In the basement, while dismantling rotten floorboards, the worker discovered an old dent on the concrete wall, as if it had been hit hard, but had been plastered over a long time ago. They did not report it to the police, just considered it a crack of time. And so, the case of Hazel and June Quinn closed in oblivion, leaving behind a city once shaken, a lonely father, and a thick file peacefully sleeping under a layer of dust. No conclusion, no justice, only a prolonged silence. The silence of two voiceless children, and of the adults who had stopped searching for them. The family's old house had changed hands, and the neighborhood had new residents. In Grand Rapids, those two names only occasionally echoed in articles about unsolved cases. But in Lansing, at the office of the Michigan State Police, MSP Cold Case Unit, one man refused to let the case fade completely. Detective Rowan Pierce, 46, was a man who had spent nearly 20 years pursuing forgotten files. He was familiar with the feeling of turning through old documents, faded ink, and discolored evidence photos. Among hundreds of cases, Pierce stopped at the file labeled 2010. What drew his attention was not just that the file lacked a legal conclusion, but that it still listed 3 items of evidence, yet to be re-examined with modern technology: the 2009 Dodge Charger, a computer hard drive, and a Garmin GPS device. Pierce flipped through each report. The first examination: weak DNA results, traces of floor cleaner chemicals, and decomposed biological samples. Everything stopped at the level of suspicion. But with his experience, he understood that even a small change in DNA analysis techniques, or digital data retrieval, could yield a detail from a seemingly dead-end case, enough to reopen everything. He wrote a note on the edge of the file: request re-evaluation of evidence using touch DNA, MVAC, and chemical molecular scanning. These techniques did not exist in 2010. They could collect DNA from a surface merely touched for a few seconds. In an internal meeting, Pierce presented to his superiors: "We have the victims' identities, a confirmed scene, but no cause of death, and no suspect. I believe the old evidence still holds untapped data." The request was approved. The Quinn sisters' case was officially listed for review. Pierce went down to the Kent County storage facility. The steel door opened, and a chill accompanied the smell of metal dust. He walked along the shelves, where hundreds of dusty files lay quietly, until he saw the evidence box was tightly sealed, containing a Seagate hard drive, an old silver GPS device, and documentation for the sealed vehicle in the evidence bay. When Pierce walked toward the vehicle's storage area, the tarp covering the Dodge Charger reflected the yellow light. 15 years confined in the cold air, the silver paint still gleamed as brightly as the day it was towed into the warehouse. He ordered all evidence transported to the Central Lansing Laboratory for re-examination using new generation forensic technology. The car was placed in the biological examination area, and every centimeter of the interior was scanned with lasers to find microscopic organic traces. The hard drive was assigned to the electronic data recovery team, and the GPS device, which in 2010 was just considered a travel accessory, now became a crucial lead. Pierce requested that technicians unlock its internal memory, searching for every rote ever saved before the time the two children disappeared. A few days later, in a meeting with the forensic team, Pierce stated clearly, "We are not looking for old testimonies or hypotheses. We are letting the evidence tell the story." He wrote 3 large lines on the whiteboard: the car, the first and last place the children were seen; the hard drive, the place where intent is hidden; the GPS, the burial location. When the technical team began unsealing the car, they noted the smell of industrial cleaner still lingering in the floor fibers. Under the seat covers, a microscopic camera recorded tiny bright particles, oxidized biological traces that could still yield DNA using current technology. A technician exclaimed, "If this is blood, we will have an answer." Simultaneously, the electronic data recovery team successfully decoded the hard drive. Files that had been deleted since 2010 slowly reappeared. Google searches saved in offline mode, a few hidden photos, automatic backup logs. Notably, in a temporary folder, technicians discovered a map file containing coordinates that had been opened, matching the area of the Elegant State Game Area, where the 2 sets of remains were discovered. Pierce stood by the glass window, feeling his heart pound after so many years of working on seemingly hopeless cases. "We are reversing time," he murmured. When the preliminary report was drafted, the first line read, "Evidence still capable of yielding DNA and geolocation data." Immediately afterward, the Kent County Prosecutor's Office issued an official announcement: the Quinn sisters' case file is being transferred to the state level for continued investigation. That same evening, in the silent office with only the light from the screen illuminating the whiteboard, Pierce stopped writing. He penned the final line under the case title: 15 years of silence is too long. It is time for the truth to speak. And as he turned off the light and left the room, the old evidence, the car, the hard drive, the GPS remained there, like silent witnesses waiting for their voices to be heard again. The 2009 Dodge Charger, formerly owned by Caleb Quinn, was transferred to the Lansing Forensic Laboratory as part of the evidence re-examination requested by Detective Rowan Pierce. After more than 15 years gathering dust in the Kent County Evidence Storage Facility, the car was unsealed in a contained laboratory, bathed in the sharp white light of industrial lamps. Pierce was there early, standing behind the observation glass, monitoring every move of the technical team. He knew that if there were any undetected traces left, they would be here. The Charger appeared almost intact, silver paint, and interior faded by time, but the cabin was unusually clean. Technician Marla Jensen, the lead microtrace analyst, began the process by scanning the surfaces with a UV light and a luminol 2.0 laser, technology that did not exist until just a few minutes later. A pale blue glow appeared along the edge of the floor behind the driver's seat. Jensen bent down, using a swab for an on-site chemical test. An oxidation reaction was clearly visible, a cleaner containing hydrogen peroxide, identical to the solution recorded in the 2000. Jensen nodded. Yes, but this time we can prove it's not just a typical cleaning product. The concentration is far beyond household-grade cleaning. This is a sign of biological trace removal. When the technical team removed the floor mats, another discovery silenced the entire team. Beneath the recently replaced felt, the metal floor still had small discolored patches, darker than the surrounding areas. Samples were cut out, marked with serial numbers, and taken to the DNA examination chamber. MVAC microcollection technology was used to suction and analyze any remaining biological molecules. The results a few hours later plunged the lab into silence. The DNA of Hazel and June Quinn was found in the floor crevices behind the driver's seat and in the trunk. This was the first time since the case was reopened that the investigative team had direct physical evidence linking Caleb's car to the two children. Although the DNA samples were heavily degraded, the match was nice. Jensen carefully signed the report: positive match, biological trace consistent with both victims. Pierce entered the room after the technical team finished sealing the samples. He opened the old case file, cross-referencing it with what had been overlooked. The first examination in 2010 only concluded no blood traces detected, because the technology at the time could not process microparticle DNA. Now that same area contained the most crucial piece of the puzzle: evidence proving an act of cleaning and material replacement. Simultaneously, the MSP Financial Division sent an auxiliary finding, a purchase receipt from a Home Depot supermarket in Grand Rapids, dated June 20, exactly when Hazel and June were reported missing. The receipt clearly listed the products: hydrogen peroxide, industrial grade, floor cleaner, replacement carpet kit, Dodge Charger model. All were paid for with a credit card in Caleb Quinn's name. Pierce held the old receipt, the paper yellowed, but the lines of text were still clear. He personally bought everything he used to erase the traces, he said, barely audible. In the new report he noted, purchase receipt matches the time of the disappearance, replaced materials consistent with current car floor sample. Hydrogen peroxide residue confirms intentional cleaning process. When the examination results were compiled, the Lansing lab sent the official report to the Michigan State Prosecutor's Office. The first line stated clearly, physical evidence recovered from vehicle indicates deliberate cleaning and partial replacement of interior components, consistent with concealment of biological trace. Elise Carmichael read the report in silence, then looked up at Pierce. We just found the key that no one touched for 15 years. This is no longer suspicion. This is deliberate action. Pierce merely nodded. He looked at the photo of the Charger being pulled out of the lab, the light reflecting on the silver hood like a cold shell concealing a crime. For 15 years that car had traveled between Grand Rapids and Allegan, carrying the secret of a summer night. Now it had finally spoken, and with the final line in the Lansing lab report, the case of Hazel and June Quinn turned a new page. The first physical evidence proving the act of trace concealment, ending the 15-year silence that Caleb Quinn had tried to maintain. The old Seagate Barracuda hard drive was placed on a steel table in the Lansing laboratory. Outside, the silver casing was scratched, sealed with a sticker from. For more than 15 years, it had lain dormant in the evidence storage as an inert object, but to Detective Rowan Pierce, this could be the only remaining witness who knew what happened the night the two children disappeared. The digital forensics team began the recovery process with the most modern forensic toolkits, In-Case Forensic and Magnet Axiom, two software programs capable of reconstructing memory structure even when data has been deleted multiple times. The reader device was connected via a specialized port, preventing any direct changes to the drive. The screen displayed continuous command strings, hundreds of thousands of hidden files gradually appearing, disparate pieces of the past coming back to life. Initially there were only normal files, electronic invoices, music files, a few family photos, but as the tool scanned deeper into the unallocated space, where data that was once deleted or overwritten is stored, the system began to show temporary files belonging to the Internet Explorer browser, time-stamped precisely in early June 2010, 2 days before the disappearance occurred. A specialist looked up and called Pierce. "You should see this." On the screen, 3 clear search queries appeared. How police find missing children, bodies of water near Grand Rapids, Allegan game area map. Simple phrases, but the time they were preserved in the data code silenced the room. The timestamp displayed June 1/3, 2010, coinciding exactly with the period before Hazel and June vanished. Not a random search, but a continuous sequence, performed only a few hours apart. Pierce stared at the screen, tapping his finger lightly on the edge of the table. "This is not a coincidence," he whispered. "This is planning." The technical team continued to restore the access history. In the temporary folder, they discovered a few more map files that were downloaded but never openly opened, files KMZ format, the offline map format of Google Earth at that time. One of them was named Route Test, showing a route from Grand Rapids to the eastern edge of the Allegan State game area, the very place where the children's remains were found. The path matched almost perfectly with the GPS data the technical team was analyzing. Another technician extracted the system logs. In the automatic notes section, the computer showed the user accessing this folder late at night, around after 11. On the same day Caleb said he was home watching television. Concurrently, image files in the My Pictures folder that were last edited also had timestamps coinciding with the night the two girls went missing. There was nothing unusual in the pictures, just landscape photos, a few shots of the forest, the water surface of a lake, but when zoomed in, the technical team noticed that the camera angles all belonged to the western Michigan forest area, and one picture had embedded location data matching the Allegan location. Pierce slowly sat down, quickly taking notes in his notebook. June 1/3, 2010 query Allegan map, search for areas with lakes, establishing behavior of preparation. When the specialists compiled the data, they discovered another unusual detail. The computer had been installed with a temporary data deletion software called CCleaner, but it was used only once right after June 3, 2010, which was a few hours after Caleb reported the disappearance to the police. That meant someone had actively cleaned the browsing history before the investigators accessed it. In the report sent to Pierce, the analyst wrote, "Queries relate to the search behavior for potential locations, forest areas, bodies of water, and post-disappearance disposal method." Timestamps coincide with the period before the victims were reported missing. It is highly likely that the computer user is a party directly involved in the incident. Pierce finished reading, closed the file, and looked through the glass window. Outside, the first thin snow began to fall. He knew that after more than 15 years, they finally had the first truly incriminating piece of evidence, a sequence of deliberate actions that could not be explained by chance. He immediately contacted Prosecutor Elise Carmichael to report the finding. On the other end of the line, her voice was almost disbelieving. "Are you sure about the time frame?" "Sure," Pierce replied. 3 days before the children disappeared. He wasn't looking for a way to save them. He was looking for a way to bury them. Carmichael was silent for a few seconds, then said slowly, "So we have the element of premeditation. From here we just need to match it with the GPS and vehicle data to have sufficient grounds for an arrest warrant." Pierce put down the phone, looking back at the computer screen where the words were still visible, "Cold and cruel. How police find missing children." A seemingly harmless question, but when typed by the very father who reported his children missing, it became a silent confession. In the laboratory the lights remained on all night. Technicians continued to download all remaining data, every packet of information saved, every file backed up. 15 years ago, the technology was insufficient to see what was hidden in this hard drive. Now every bit of data had opened the door to the truth, a door Caleb Quinn thought he had locked forever. Pierce stood up quietly, folding his notebook, with a single thought echoing in his mind. No crime sleeps forever, only evidence waits long enough to be heard. After the computer data was recovered, the forensics team moved to the second important piece of evidence, the Garmin Nuvi 255W navigation device, seized from Caleb Quinn's Dodge Charger. In 2010, it was just a common navigation device, but in Detective Rowan Pierce's eyes, it could be the only journal recording the true journey of a liar. The GPS was unsealed in the MSP Forensic Lab's digital forensics room. Outside, the silver plastic casing was discolored, but the internal memory remained intact. A technician plugged in the connection cable, activating the original data reading mode. After just a few minutes, hidden files were extracted by the system. A list of hundreds of coordinate points appeared on the screen. The device's movement history, and when Pierce requested filtering by the early June timeframe, the data sequence displayed a clear line of travel, from Grand Rapids, heading southwest via the M89 highway, ending at the eastern edge of the Allegan State Game Area, the exact area where the two sets of remains were discovered. The time recorded for the journey coincided with the night Caleb reported the two children vanished. The location data was detailed down to the minute. The car departed from the Maple Grove residential area near midnight, briefly stopping once near a suburban gas station, then continuing non-stop for over an hour. Upon reaching Allegan, the log showed a stop lasting 47 minutes in a secluded forest area, less than a kilometer from where Hazel and June's remains were found. Afterward, the car turned around and returned to Grand Rapids via the same route, arriving back at the residential area in the early morning. When Pierce saw the reconstructed map, he stood in silence for a long time. The red line from the Quinn home to Allegan twisted through the dark woods, then stopped precisely where last year's wildfire had burned through and exposed the small skeletons. There was no room left for coincidence. To verify, the forensics team coordinated with the state police's financial analysis unit. They cross-referenced gas purchase receipts using Caleb's card during that period. The results showed a transaction at a Speedway gas station about 15 miles from Grand Rapids. During the same hour the GPS recorded the brief stop. The amount of gasoline pumped matched almost perfectly with the distance recorded by the navigation system. A closed logical chain: departure, refueling, a 47-minute stop in Allegan, and return. Pierce requested a 3D simulation of the journey to present to the prosecutor. The large screen clearly showed a red dot representing the car moving at night, the route not deviating from the axis. GPS data, time, distance, and fuel consumption were all an absolute match. All of it pointed to one thing: Caleb Quinn left home the night the two children disappeared, and went to the very place where their bodies were later found. The technical team also discovered a small but important detail. After returning to Grand Rapids, the GPS device had its entire trip history deleted. However, due to the characteristics of the 2009-era Garmin Nuvi, the data was not permanently deleted, but only hidden from the user interface. That deletion could only have been done manually, meaning Caleb himself did it. In the report sent to prosecutor Elise Carmichael, Pierce clearly noted, the Garmin Nuvi 255W device, recovered from Caleb Quinn's vehicle, recorded the Grand Rapids, Allegan, Grand Rapids journey on the night of a stop lasting 47 minutes, was recorded at coordinates 42,439 dues, 85.992 W, coinciding with the area where the two victims' remains were discovered. The subsequent deletion of data demonstrates the intent to conceal movement. Elise finished reading, saying nothing for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp. We just got the straight line connecting the suspect to the disposal site. Pierce just nodded. 15 years ago, All evidence was wiped clean. Now the old device itself, which Caleb thought he had permanently erased, had become the most important witness. In the lab, the map was still on the screen, the red line flickering to a stop in the Allegan Forest area, within the silent gap that lasted. That much time was enough for a man to dig a hole, bury 2 small lives, and drive home before sunrise. Pierce closed the GPS file, writing a short line on the cover, direct link between suspect and disposal site, irrefutable journey evidence. He knew that from this moment on, the case of Hazel and June Quinn was no longer an unsolved missing persons case. It had officially become a case of premeditated murder, and the name Caleb Quinn would soon return to the list of prosecutions for the state of Michigan. After the digital evidence was established, the hard drive containing the suspicious search queries and the GPS device recording the trip to Allegan, Detective Rowan Pierce began to focus on the aspect he always believed was the submerged part of the iceberg, the motive. Evidence could prove the act, but only a motive could explain why a father would commit such an act against his own children. Pierce and prosecutor Elise Carmichael reviewed all supplementary documents. They searched hospital records, insurance files, and federal medical data sources that had previously been untouched due to privacy laws at the time. When they searched using Caleb Quinn's social security number, the system revealed a series of scattered medical transactions in June 2000. One item on the list made Pierce pause: an examination at the private clinic Midwest Urgent Care in Grand Rapids. Reason: the evaluation for potential STD exposure. The attached file showed Caleb was prescribed antibiotics to treat gonorrhea. The doctor's note indicated the patient declined comprehensive testing and appeared anxious, wanted to leave early. Elise read the segment, placed the paper on the table, her voice low. "That timing is right after the disappearance. What do you think?" Pierce answered, without hesitation. He contracted the disease before he took the 2 children out of the house, and afterward, he panicked over the consequences. But they needed more to prove the connection between the medical records and the crime. Pierce requested the Financial Investigation Unit to retrieve Caleb's credit card history during the same time frame. The result returned a small but unusual transaction: the purchase of Plan B at a Walgreens pharmacy on Leonard Street, just 2 days before he called to report his children missing. Plan B is emergency contraception, typically used within 72 hours of intercourse. It was not something a single middle-aged man would need, unless he was trying to deal with the consequences of a forbidden act. When the composite report was complete, Pierce stared at the 2 timestamps: Plan B purchase, 6/1/2010, STD examination, 6/2010. All occurred within the exact gap between when the 2 children were alive and when he reported them missing. Elise was silent for a few seconds. "It aligns perfectly with the criminal pattern of concealing domestic abuse," she said. "When the perpetrator realizes the victim might be pregnant or might disclose the event, he chooses to eliminate the evidence at any cost." Pierce did not reply. He had investigated dozens of similar cases, but every time he touched this part of the truth, he still felt his stomach clench. He pictured the 2 children, Hazel and June, in the brightly lit room that night, and the man the entire neighborhood once believed was a devoted father. In the internal report he wrote, "Caleb Quinn's medical records show examination and treatment for a sexually transmitted disease within 1 week after the 2 victims were reported missing." The transaction receipt for the purchase of Plan B coincides with the time immediately preceding the disappearance. Based on the combination of evidence including data deletion, travel to the Allegan area, and disposal of the bodies, there is a basis to determine that the primary criminal motive was to conceal an act of sexual abuse and the potential discovery of its consequences. Elise held the report, reread every line, then looked up. "We have enough elements to present to the court for an arrest warrant. It's not just suspicion, this is a clear motive." Pierce nodded, feeling as though every piece of the puzzle was clicking into place. The hard drive showed the plan, the GPS proved the journey, and the medical records exposed the fear Caleb tried to hide. For 15 years he had thought time would erase the traces, but these very documents, seemingly harmless, became the thread that pulled the entire crime into the light. Before leaving the room, Pierce looked out the window. The Lansing sky was overcast, with a thin drizzle. He quietly said to Elise, "We can't bring the 2 children back, but at least we can leave him no place to hide." And in the final summary sent to the state of Michigan, Pierce's concluding line was typed in bold: "Motive established, concealment of sexual abuse, leading to murder for the purpose of evidence destruction. The action was premeditated and prepared in advance. When the final investigation results were compiled, Detective Rowan Pierce sat alone in the cold case unit conference room. In front of him was a whiteboard covered with photos, timelines, receipts, and map. After 15 years, the disparate pieces of a missing persons case finally fit together into a complete picture, chillingly clear. He began at the first point. Caleb took time off work. Timesheets from the Holland & Sons machine factory showed Caleb called in sick for 2 consecutive days, June 1 and 2. He did not provide medical documentation, and when asked, only said he was tired, wanted to stay home with the kid. Those were the last 2 days Hazel and June were ever seen. Next was the online search. Data recovered from the hard drive showed that during this time, Caleb typed a series of queries about how police find missing children, area with lakes near Grand Rapids, and Allegan game area map. These queries appeared repeatedly, interspersed with downloaded map files. The behavior clearly demonstrated preparation, not a random reaction. From the financial evidence, Pierce added the third piece of the puzzle, the purchase of Plan B and clean. On June 1, the camera at the Walgreens store recorded Caleb entering, purchasing a pack of Plan B and 2 bottles of hydrogen peroxide-based cleaning solution, the same type found in his garage. The receipt was timestamped. That was the evening before he claimed his children were still watching TV in the living room. The next timeline segment led to the trip to Allegan. GPS data from the Garmin Nuvi showed the car left home around 11:17 p.m. on the night of June 1, traveling southwest, stopping briefly at a Speedway gas station, then continuing to the Allegan State Game Area Forest. The stop lasted 47 minutes, coinciding with the location where the 2 children's remains were later found. The car then returned to Grand Rapids, entering the residential area around 3 a.m. Finally, the call reporting the disappearance. According to police call logs, Caleb contacted the 911 dispatcher at 7:32 a.m. on June 3, with a calm voice, stating that his 2 daughters disappeared overnight, and the door was locked. Maybe they left on their own. Just a few hours later, when police arrived at the scene, everything in the house was spotless, the floors polished, the furniture tidy, as if someone had had time to thoroughly prepare before calling. Pierce looked up at the completed timeline, each step interlocking, like mechanical gears. June 1. Took off work, bought Plan B and cleaner, night of June 1, searched Allegan map. Departed at 11:17 p.m. Early morning June 2, stopped 47 minutes in Allegan Forest. June 2, did not go to work, cleaned the house. Morning of June 3, called to report children missing. All created a logical and continuous chain of behavior, preparation, execution, concealment, staging the scene. There were no more gaps. With the technical data, Pierce requested the forensic simulation department to reconstruct the entire scene in 3D. On the large screen, the reconstructed image displayed the house, the route, and the journey of the Dodge Charger. The GPS marker moved slowly, the light in the simulation shifting gradually from night to dawn. When the red dot stopped for 47 minutes in the Allegan Forest, the conference room fell silent. Elise Carmichael stood beside Pierce, her voice strained. There's no room for doubt anymore. He prepared everything 2 days beforehand, and he buried them with his own hands. Pierce only nodded. It took us 15 years to hear this story told back to us by the data itself. That same day, he finalized the 48-hour behavior reconstruction report, comprising 42 pages, along with the 3D simulation and route map. The final concluding line was highlighted in red. Physical, electronic, and financial data establishes a sequence of deliberate actions, proving the act of murder and body disposal for the purpose of concealing the crime of abuse. Recommend the state issue an arrest warrant for suspect Caleb Quinn. As Pierce put his pen to the paper, he knew this file would be the conclusion of the 15-year journey to find the truth, and the beginning of a new chapter, where justice finally had a chance to speak. The next morning at the Michigan State Prosecutor's Office, Elise Carmichael spread the entire case file of Hazel and June Quinn across the table. Papers were stacked high, interspersed with crime scene photos, data charts, and thick forensic reports. Beside her, Detective Rowan Pierce flipped through each page, checking the forensic certification stamps. Both knew they were standing at the final threshold of the investigation, where only one step remained to turn all the evidence into a legally valid indictment. The file began with a summary of the 48-hour final investigation, drafted by Pierce. Each timeline marker was clearly organized: time off work, Plan B purchase, a Legan map search, GPS journey, and the call reporting the disappearance. Every piece of data aligned precisely, forming a deliberate chain of action. Elise reread it, her finger moving slowly over each line, occasionally pausing to take notes. "This is the firmest foundation we have," she said, "if we want to persuade the state court to approve the arrest warrant." Next was the forensic report section. From the Lansing laboratory, the specialists had sent back 3 critical results. Biological traces in the interior of the Dodge Charger had DNA matching the 2 victims, Hazel and June. The computer hard drive contained a sequence of searches, indicating pre-crime preparation, with timestamps from June 1 to 3. The GPS device recorded the precise journey to the area where the remains were discovered, along with the deliberate act of data deletion. Upon reading this section, Elise slightly nodded. These 3 pieces of evidence are enough to establish an undeniable link between Caleb and the death of the 2 children. All random elements are eliminated. Pierce added the medical records and financial transactions he and the investigative team had collected, the Plan B receipt, the STD examination record, and the hydrogen peroxide-based cleaning solution. All point to the motive of concealing abuse. "That's the deepest layer of the case," he said. Elise looked at him for a moment, her face hardened. "Sometimes I wish I didn't have to understand the motive so clearly," she said softly, "but that's precisely what makes the indictment comprehensive." They spent many hours reviewing the entire chain of legal evidence, ensuring every part was admissible in court. Elise instructed the administrative department to back up the electronic files, and compiled a list of witnesses and technical experts to be summoned during the trial. In the summary sent to the Michigan Attorney General, she wrote, "The current evidence fully meets the prosecution standards. The suspect's sequence of actions demonstrates premeditation, planning and concealment of consequence. Request the issuance of an arrest warrant and criminal prosecution against Caleb Quinn under Statute 7, second-degree murder." Pierce added a short note, 2 separate counts corresponding to the 2 victims. That afternoon, they jointly presented the file before Judge Anthony Keller of the Kent County Court. The courtroom was small, no public present, only 3 people, the judge, the prosecutor and the investigator. Elise stood straight, her voice articulate, presenting each piece of evidence. Each time she introduced a document, Pierce placed a stamped forensic copy on the table. Judge Keller meticulously examined each item, tapping his pen on the desk. "Are you certain this is the same person, the same act, and is the evidence not merely based on speculation?" Elise responded immediately, "Sir, all data was recovered directly from the suspect's devices, confirmed by the state laboratory. There is no element of assumption." After nearly an hour of presentation, Keller leaned back in his chair, his gaze contemplative. Finally he spoke slowly. "The court approves the motion for prosecution, and grants the arrest warrant for Caleb Quinn on 2 counts of second-degree murder. Based on the file, this is a case with elements of preparation and serious concealment of consequence. I wish you well in the remainder of the process." Upon leaving the court, Elise and Pierce said nothing. They knew they had just crossed the boundary between investigation and justice, from finding the truth to forcing the guilty party to face. On the way back to headquarters, Elise looked through the car window, her voice subdued. "We waited 15 years for this warrant," Pierce quietly replied, his eyes still fixed on the snow-dusted road. "And now time is no longer on his side." That evening a copy of the arrest warrant was sent to the Grand Rapids Police Department. The bold headline read, "State of Michigan vs. Caleb Quinn, charges, second-degree murder 2 count." After 15 years, what was once concealed by silence, by cleaning and by fear, was finally rewritten in bold, dry, yet undeniable lines. Justice is coming. Early one April morning in 2025, the quiet Maple Grove neighborhood was shrouded in a thin mist. No one knew that in just a few minutes, the place that had been forgotten for 15 years would again become the focus of the entire state of Michigan. From the end of the alley, a convoy of armored vehicles from the Michigan State Police SWAT Team silently advanced, their tires slowly rolling on the dew-soaked pavement. Inside the vehicles, there was only the metallic clicking of rifle safety catches and the sharp, brief commands over the radio. Target confirmed, 118 Maple Grove. Apprehend subject Caleb Quinn. Warrant is legal, civilian safety is priority. Inside the old blue-painted house, Caleb Quinn maintained his old routine, brewing coffee, turning on the AM radio, and quietly sitting by the window. He was completely unaware that outside figures in body armor had closed in from both directions. When the loudspeaker blared, "Caleb Quinn, this is the Michigan State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest. Step outside with your hands raised." The house was plunged into a moment of absolute silence, then the lights inside suddenly went out. 3 seconds later, the front door was breached. The sound of metal hitting wood echoed, smoke billowed, and flashlights swept across the living room. Clear left, clear right. The commands were rapid. Caleb stood in the kitchen, hands raised high, eyes wide, but offered no resistance. He was tackled to the floor and cuffed behind his back. As the team leader read the Miranda rights, he only whispered, his voice hoarse, "I knew this day would come." The specialized vehicle carrying Caleb left Maple Grove before the sky had fully brightened. Neighbors opened their doors, only catching a glimpse of red and blue lights flashing across the wall, then vanishing around the bend. The man who had lived quietly for 15 years was taken directly to Kent County Jail for interrogation and detention pending arraignment. The first news bulletin aired only a few hours later. Michigan State Police has arrested Caleb Quinn, 57, in connection with the deaths of his 2 daughters, Hazel and June Quinn, who disappeared at noon at the MSP Lansing headquarters. Prosecutor Elise Carmichael and Detective Rowan Pierce appeared together at a press conference. Standing before dozens of reporters, Elise read the official statement. After 15 years of relentless investigation, thanks to the application of modern forensic technology, digital data recovery, microparticle DNA analysis, and GPS location tracking, the Michigan State Police has identified the person responsible for the deaths of Hazel and June Quinn. Today, Caleb Quinn has been arrested and charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. Behind the lectern, a large screen projected a sequence of images: the house at Maple Grove, the GPS travel map, and a 3D reconstruction of the crime scene. Reporters jostled to ask questions. One asked, "How did you find evidence after all these years?" Pierce's reply was brief, his voice firm as steel, "With patience and data. Everything he tried to erase was still there, just waiting to be seen." The news spread quickly, dominating the evening news report. The headline on local television scrolled in large letters, "MSP solves 2010 Grand Rapids cold case, father arrested after 15 years." The Grand Rapids community, once heartbroken over the disappearance of the 2 children, now experienced a mixed sense of shock and relief. In front of the old house, residents placed flowers, candles, and photos of the 2 girls by the walkway, transforming what was once a symbol of silence into a small memorial. That night, returning to his office, Pierce stood silently looking at the completed case file. The folder, once covered in dust, now bore a red stamp, "Closed, arrest executed." He quietly said to Elise, "No one wins this case, only 2 children finally get their voices back." And outside, in Grand Rapids, the candlelight still flickered on the porch of the old Quinn home, small but persistent flames, like justice finally lit after 15 years of slumber. Courtroom 2 of the Kent County Courthouse was packed on a summer morning in 2025. After 15 years of silence, the case of Hazel and June Quinn, the 2 sisters murdered in 2010, was finally brought to justice. In the defendant's row, Caleb Quinn wore an orange jumpsuit, his hands lightly cuffed, sitting silently, his face as hard as stone. Next to him was his defense attorney, Martin Heller, appointed by the Public Defender's Office. On the prosecution side, Prosecutor Elise Carmichael stood at the head of the table. In front of her was a stack of documents, nearly half a meter thick, all the evidence that she and Detective Rowan Pierce had spent nearly 2 years compiling. Beside her was Dr. Nolan Reyes, a Michigan State Police forensic expert who was responsible for examining all the recovered physical evidence. When the gavel struck, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Anthony Keller, who had signed Caleb's arrest warrant, now sat on the high bench, his gaze stern, The trial of the defendant Caleb Quinn, 57, on 2 counts of second-degree murder, has begun. Elise stepped up to the podium, her voice clear and articulate. "Your Honor, this is not just a case about 2 small lives taken, but also proof that justice never dies. After 15 years, thanks to modern forensic technology, the truth has finally been recovered, from digital data, biological traces, to the location trail left by the defendant himself." She began with the DNA evidence sequence, laboratory photographs, expert reports, and the results matching the microparticle DNA found in the interior of the 2000. Elise pointed to the projection screen. "This is the DNA sample extracted from the floor mat behind the driver's seat, which completely matches Hazel Quinn's biological profile. This sample was stored under standard preservation conditions, as confirmed by Dr. Ray." When the prosecutor projected the GPS map, the entire courtroom almost held its breath. A red line connecting Grand Rapids to Allegan appeared, along with a 47-minute stop at the exact coordinates where the remains of the 2 girls were discovered. Elise spoke slowly, every word clear. The Garmin Nuvi 255W device recorded the only journey that matched the night the 2 children disappeared. This data was recovered using digital forensic tools, confirming that it could not have been post-edited. She then moved on to the computer data and medical records. A sequence of searches for how police find missing children, bodies of water near Grand Rapids, and Allegan game area map, accompanied by a receipt for Plan B, and Caleb's medical records for a sexually transmitted disease, all formed a continuous chain of behavior, from preparation to disposal and concealment of the consequences. Attorney Heller rose to object. He emphasized that the samples are too old, and biological integrity cannot be guaranteed, and that the GPS data may be flawed due to outdated technology. He also tried to argue that long-term storage could lead to DNA sample contamination. Elise did not respond immediately, but motioned for the expert witness to take the stand. Nolan Reyes, a middle-aged man with a calm voice, testified before the court. "I confirm that all physical evidence was stored at the Kent County Evidence Facility, according to the National Forensic Standard, ACE. The storage temperature did not exceed 12 over Circ. 6, and the DNA samples were sealed in 3 layers. The digital data was stored on the original device, with a log of access control. All procedures comply with ISO-I." He projected a series of photos of the evidence storage room, the seals intact with timestamps from 2010. Judge Keller nodded, making a note on the record. After the rebuttal, he made a brief declaration. "The court accepts all evidence submitted by the prosecution. The motion to exclude the samples due to suspected deviation is denied. The defendant Caleb Quinn will remain in custody without bail." The sound of the gavel echoed again, firm and resolute. Caleb looked up, but his eyes were expressionless. He knew he had no escape. Outside the courthouse, dozens of reporters were waiting. The news quickly spread. "Kent County Court admits all forensic evidence. The Quinn case becomes landmark for cold case investigation." Television channels called it a model case for cold case investigation. He quietly said to Elise, 15 years, and now justice finally has a shape." Elise simply replied, "We can't bring them back, but at least the truth is no longer buried with them." In the early summer breeze of Grand Rapids, the notice board outside the courthouse remained illuminated. "State of Michigan veers." A week after the trial concluded, Grand Rapids was lit up again. On the lawn in front of St. Andrew's Church, hundreds of residents gathered for a vigil for sisters Hazel and June Quinn, 2 names once lost to oblivion for 15 years, now recalled with deep emotion and pain. The early summer wind swept through the candles in their hands, creating a shimmering sea of light in the night. The church bells chimed 3 times, slow and mournful, like a belated farewell to the 2 children who had vanished in silence. On the simple wooden stage, Pastor Jordan Hale, who had supported the community in the early days of the disappearance, stood quietly for a moment before speaking. 15 years ago we prayed for their return. 15 years later we pray for their peace. Justice is late, but it has arrived, not with gunshots, not with anger, but with the persistence of people who never gave up. In the pews, Detective Rowan Pierce and Prosecutor Elise Carmichael sat silently. Both avoided attention, but many recognized them and nodded their thanks. When the pastor mentioned those who dug up the past to restore the victims' voices, his eyes turned toward them. Pierce bowed his head, a mix of relief and heaviness, because he knew that for this evening to happen, too many years were spent in darkness, too many irreparable mistakes. After the prayer, a large screen erected in the churchyard began to play a short video produced by the Michigan State Police, MSP, a summary report of the Quinn sisters' case. The images appeared: the forensic lab, technicians recovering data, a 3D model of the vehicle's journey, maps of the Allegan forest, and the old GPS device. The narrator's voice resonated. Forensic technology is not just a tool, but an extension of justice. Every data point, every trace, has its own voice, if only someone is willing to listen. Local reporters broadcast live. The entire city followed the ceremony as a closing to the most painful chapter in Grand Rapids history. They talked about the persistence of the cold case team, about the techniques that did not exist 15 years ago, microparticle DNA analysis, hard drive data recovery, GPS device decoding, and how they turned a seemingly hopeless case into a victory for the truth. On the stage, Elise spoke briefly, her voice calm but charged with emotion. No justice can fully compensate for a family's loss. But every case solved is not just because of technology, but because of perseverance. Because when an investigator says, "I'm not convinced this is the end of the line," that is where the truth begins its return. Pierce did not speak, standing instead behind the rows of people, looking at the photo of the two children placed among the candle. He recalled the first time he read the file, the cold words "unsolved disappearance," and felt grateful that he hadn't ignored it. As the ceremony ended, residents came forward to place flowers and white balloons around the small memorial, bearing the inscription, "Hazel Quinn, 12, June Quinn, 9, no longer in the embrace of their parents, but forever in the embrace of justice." The wind blew harder. The candles wavered, but they did not go out. That light reflected in everyone's eyes, the light of belief, of the truth restored after so many years. Before leaving, a reporter asked Pierce, "What do you think is the biggest message from this case?" He only looked up at the dark sky where the candle smoke faded into the wind, and replied slowly, "Evidence never gets old. Only people stop looking." That quote was featured in the evening news, running across the headlines of every major newspaper in Michigan. And as the light of the ceremony slowly faded, Grand Rapids was once again enveloped in calm. But this time, it was a true calm, because the two children had been heard, and justice had finally called out the name of the one who stole their voice. The story of sisters Hazel and June Quinn is not just the tragedy of a small Grand Rapids family, but also reflects many issues still present in American life today. Domestic violence, community indifference, and the increasingly vital role of forensic technology in finding justice. The fact that Caleb Quinn, a seemingly normal father, could hide his crime for 15 years highlights the dark corners that modern society sometimes refuses to confront. Victims of domestic violence often have no voice, and warning signs are easily overlooked, simply because everything looks normal. When the case was solved, thanks to microparticle DNA technology, hard drive data recovery, and GPS tracking, it also sent a powerful message that science and perseverance can overcome time itself, that justice is never truly lost, only waiting to be seen. In an America facing thousands of missing persons cases every year, Hazel and June's story reminds us that community concern, vigilance, and responsibility are the first line of defense against such tragedy. It is also a reminder for every family: do not let silence become complicity, do not treat abnormal behavior in relatives as a private matter. And finally, as Detective Pierce said at the vigil, evidence never gets old, only people stop looking. In America today, that is true not just for police or judges, but for every citizen, those who can choose not to turn away from the pain of others. Thank you for following the story of Hazel and June Quinn to the end. The journey of justice recovered after 15 years of silence. Please subscribe to our channel to continue exploring other true crime cases with us, where the truth is always waiting to be told, and justice never sleeps.